Excavation Profits Podcast by Excavation Marketing Pros. Interviews with successful excavation and septic business owners, revealing how they market and grow their business in today's economy. Hear directly from the most successful leaders in your business and discover what they're doing to keep their phone ringing, equipment running, and businesses booming. Now your host, Scott Andreessen.
Well, hello, everyone. This is Scott Andreessen with the Excavation Profits Podcast. And today I would like to welcome our guest, Brian Harding. He is founder of Service Industry Success and author of the book you see right here, Service Industry Success. He is a phenomenal expert at developing your team and building your business. So we're going to talk with him, and he's going to share some wisdom nuggets about how he grew his business, his journey, and everything like that. So how are you, Brian?
Doing great, bud. How you doing?
Excellent. Thank you. So we met in Washington a few weeks ago at the NAURA mega conference for on-site wastewater and septic. And I was really impressed with, you were a guest speaker there, a keynote speaker, and I saw two of your speeches there, and you gave a lot of great advice. And I gave you a brief introduction, but go ahead and share with us a little bit more about yourself, how you got started in the service industry and so on.
Well, my first real job was in the steel industry. I worked in a big steel distributor. I was a crane operator and a machine operator. And then after 5 years in the warehouse, I moved into management. It was in the late 90s, and the U.S. was kind of having these tariff wars with like China and Brazil and Korea and Russia and things like that. So the steel industry took a big gnarly turn. I knew the writing was on the wall for me when I had to lay off 14 of my guys in one day. And so it became kind of clear that, I didn't have much of a few, you don't need a supervisor if you don't have a crew, right? So this is back in the old days when I actually picked up a newspaper to look for a job, and I found a company that was hiring apprentice plumbers. And so I took a 50% pay cut and I got into the plumbing industry. And over the course of the next 7 years, I went from an apprentice plumber. I wasn't a fan of crawl spaces, honestly. There was this big earthquake that happened like right as I was out in my truck getting parts. I just got out of a crawl space, and I wasn't really a fan of that. So then I moved into commercial sales, and I did commercial sales in the plumbing industry for a while. And then I became, because of my operations background, when the spot opened up, I became the assistant general manager, and I became the general manager of that company, of that branch of that company. It's a nationwide company. Mm-hmm. So at 33, I had, I think, 68 employees, and we were doing about $8 million a year in revenue. This is back in 2006. And then a few years later, a couple guys and I started our own company, and literally started from, the traditional American dream story. Like, my living room was global headquarters. We had nothing. My sales car was an $1,100 1997 Ford Taurus with a brown stripe on the sides. It was, it's comical now. It was pretty stressful then, but it's comical now of how we got started. And then I sold my shares of that company almost 4 years ago now, and started getting into helping other business owners and things like that. When I sold, we were doing about 9,000 jobs a year. We had 54 employees. And things were clicking along pretty good. And kind of the last big thing I had to do before I left was prepare the leadership team that now runs that company, like teach them how to run a company. So that's kind of a, super abbreviated version of how I got into the service industry and a little bit about my background.
Wow. Okay. So you built that up to, you said 54 employees?
Yeah.
54 employees. What was the business doing revenue-wise at that time?
$8 million a year or so, a little north of $8 million. In today's prices now, 4 years ago, prices have probably gone up conservatively 25%. So in today's dollars, it's, probably 10 million a year, I would guess.
Wow. And what sort of challenges did you face building it up to that level?
All of them.
Yeah.
A shorter list would certainly be what challenges didn't you face? I mean, you name it. I mean, in the beginning, we had 3 full-time employees before any of the owners even took a paycheck. We made money by selling things to the company. One of my partners sold a pipe rack to the company for $100 in lieu of a paycheck because we didn't have any money. The company wasn't generating anything yet. And then, lots of trials and tribulations with marketing. That was a fiasco. We tried different companies, all the problems everyone has with that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, hiring in the plumbing industry at that time and even today, and honestly, for the last 25, 30 years, hiring has just been a nightmare, And so there was no such thing as like hiring a journeyman plumber. We had to hire, people who were green and teach them pretty much everything. And so, developing a training program, having cash flow to fund buying new vehicles. We grew an average about 38% a year, and that's expensive to buy things. You had to buy a truck and wrap it and shelve it and equip it and never mind the training, the labor costs of training people. So each stage of the business, we just encountered all the same problems everyone does. A lot of it, of course, is there's just not enough money to take home a lot of money, fund growth, and have money in your savings account in case something bad happens. Sometimes there's not enough money to satisfy all those needs, and things run a little leaner than you would like. And we had a couple catastrophic failures as far as flooding places and causing damage, and I mean, just all the stuff everybody has. So there's not one thing that stands out. I would just say we were not immune from the things that hamper all small business owners in service industries.
Yeah. What are some of the common issues that you see in service-based businesses that prevents them from reaching their full potential?
I would say, well, there's a few, and now, so a little bit more about how I got started doing what I do now. As our company was growing, people started noticing and started asking, they would call and ask questions like, "Hey, I got a problem. Can I run this by you, or can I take you to lunch and, run some things by you or whatever?" But then I started teaching classes at supply houses on how to read financials or how to write procedures and processes, or, leadership team development stuff. And that's kind of what my first little dipping my toe in the water of this kind of coaching consulting world. That's kind of how that all unfolded. So now, having gone through it as a business owner, but and then with also the perspective of being an outsider looking into companies, there's a few things I think that stand out. One of them is when business owners start a company, we generally do it because we want freedom. We want financial freedom. We want time freedom. We don't want to work for a company telling us to do things that we think aren't the right thing. Like we say we want this freedom. But we start a company and then we start hiring employees and we demand compliance. And you can't have improvement and compliance, right? So one of the ways to look at this is, if you look at the Japanese auto industry after World War II, they were completely decimated, and the U.S. auto industry was just going gangbusters, right?
Right.
And the U.S. auto industry kind of got a little cocky, right? And they kind of had this mindset of we know everything there is to know about making cars. Like, you don't need to come to us with any new ideas and things like that. And Japan was basically starting over. And so a guy named Dr. Edward Deming went over and taught them about process improvement and quality and all that kind of stuff. And 30 years later, they're putting out the Toyota Camry and we're putting out the Ford Pinto. And there's a little bit of that in all of us, in that we are really good at our craft and we're really good at our trade, but running a business takes an entirely different skill set. And the things that made us really good plumbers or tradespeople or service providers are not necessarily the same skills that make us good business owners. But we take that approach to running a business. And when you're teaching somebody how to do things like excavation or plumbing or septic tank pumping or whatever, you teach them a way to do this thing and you just demand that they do that thing all the time. Well, that works fine as long as you have direct oversight on things. But as you're building a company, you can't have direct oversight on things, and you need to have people in place who can make really good decisions. So you're no longer delegating tasks, you're delegating decision making, which requires that they have an ability to find and make improvements. And so that's kind of going back to my Japanese auto industry thing. That's how they came up with the Toyota Camry in 1980 and have gone on to become exceptionally good at building cars, because they have a model where decisions are made at the lowest possible level. And business owners in service industries tend to they want that model where they have freedom and they have people who can make great decisions, but they operate it with the mindset of wanting control, right? So it's a very top-down structure versus a bottom-up structure. And that friction of, I say I want freedom, but I'm operating as if I need control, that friction creates a tremendous, it just creates a ceiling, because there's only so many decisions a person can make in a day. And if you don't have people who you can trust to make decisions, the business can't grow beyond how many decisions you can make in a day, or how many processes you can stay on top of, or how many things you can follow up on or check in on, or did we take care of this customer? Did we get to that thing on time? If we don't have people who can make really competent decisions, the business can't grow beyond the business owner's ability to oversee things.
Yeah.
So that would be one of the first things I would say that people just need to have an awareness of, that is a real hampering thing, is that internal conflict we have as the business owner of saying we want freedom, but demanding control.
Yeah. The question that, at least from when I talk with excavation and septic business owners, is what do you put in place at what phase? So for instance, maybe we can break down our conversation here based on where the business is at and what sort of systems or processes do you think they should have in place by that point? Like, let's say they're from new up to what, $1 million, or new up to $500,000, perhaps?
Let me pull something up here. When I went through, and while I'm pulling this up, I'll kind of explain how this came about. When I started doing this, my intent was to write a book, because I learned that of the 12 business coaches I knew, only one had ever owned a business, and that really pissed me off. So I decided I was going to write a book and solve the world's problems, right?
Yeah.
And as I went through it and went through the editing process and things like that, the version that I publish is not the version I wrote to begin with. The version I wrote to begin with was much more comprehensive, but it would have been an 800-page book and nobody would have bought that. So the book I published is just about managing people. But as I began, and I spent about a year writing this, and I kind of went through and broke it into 5 stages. So, and I didn't do it by revenue. I did more about headcount and kind of where the business naturally drives you. So, but we kind of have 5. I have kind of 5 stages. There's like a startup phase. Then there's a phase where you start having, some employees, and then there's stage 3 would be when the business is big enough where the business owner needs to stop being an employee in their own company and transition into being like a business owner in their company. And then there's a stage after that, stage 4, which is kind of where the business doesn't need the business owner anymore. There's a lot of freedom that all of a sudden happens pretty rapidly, actually. And then stage 5 would be kind of where I was before I sold, which is just a mentorship role, teaching the leadership team. So in stage 1, things to focus on, I would say, are, you got to get the basics in place. You got to have your buy-sell agreement. You got to have your legal documents. You got to have that stuff kind of ironed out. The things that would be catastrophic if they weren't done well, we got to get those things ironed out, which include, getting the information on your P&L correct. Having an accurate, up-to-date P&L is something that, Many business owners just they're months behind on that. I talked to business owners who haven't read their P&L in 9 months. That's insane to me. It's crazy. That's like flying an airplane blind. I mean, it's nuts, right? And also, of course, cash flow is like the big thing in the beginning. Cash flow is probably the number one thing that puts companies out of business. And in the beginning, it's exceptionally, it's arguably the most important thing. And the decisions at that stage are made based on what's happening like right now and maybe later this year. So that would be kind of the stage one thing. Is we're starting up. Decisions are made on a pretty short-term basis. And again, cash flow would be something I would look at as a big thing. And then all those kind of necessary precautions, like again your buy-sell agreement, your operating agreement, that kind of stuff.
And like when I for instance, in the startup phase, I notice I'll talk to a lot of guys and they will do the job and then wait to get paid at the end rather than doing deposit schedules of before to get on the schedule, X amount of percent, maybe 30%.
50% down or whatever. Yeah. I mean, some
covering materials and things like that. Yeah. But a lot of them don't. And they will just, upon good faith, book them in the calendar, go out, do the job, and then just wait to collect the money at the end. But that seems pretty risky, right? Like when we're talking about cash flow,
just risky in that you might not get paid, but it's also it's just not creating a consistent cash flow process. And so it's a real herky jerky. Like you get a bunch of money and then you starve for a while, and then you get a bunch of money because what happens is we don't pay attention to that stuff until all of a sudden we look at our checking account and we go, holy crap, I have $4,000 in my checking account. I better get on the phone. Get on the phone, we start calling a bunch of people, and then boom, we get this influx of cash. But it's not a process. It's not a smooth, regularly occurring, occurrence. It's real herky jerky, and that's tremendously stressful for the business. Also, in this startup phase, we got to start getting an idea of what are our costs associated with doing jobs. Like, the term cost of goods sold, like this, we need to start learning this pretty early. Like we need to understand our financials. What is a gross margin? In my opinion, arguably the most important number on the P&L is the gross margin. And using that to dictate pricing, to understand the healthiness of our company. I kind of look at financials for a company as like if the company was a person, the financials are the brain. You could have all the altruistic, you could give every penny you make to the Make-A-Wish Foundation and to charity or something like that. You could have all these altruistic desires, but if the company is if it's losing money, like nothing else matters. So it's not because I'm a money first kind of guy. I'm really not. I mean, don't get me wrong. I want to make money doing this stuff. Don't get me wrong. But if we don't stay on top of the financials, we're not paying attention to the brain of the patient, and if the brain dies, nothing else matters. So not just financials at a macro level, like the P&L, but also financials at a micro level. What is our expected and goal? Two different numbers. What is our expected and goal profit percentage for a job? What is our expected and goal gross margin targets? What is our expected and goal bottom line profit, percentage? These are things that the earlier we get familiar with this stuff, the easier it is for our businesses to grow, because we understand how much it costs to run a business, which we think we know in the beginning, but all we have is employees' perspective, and there's things we don't know in the beginning. So the sooner we learn that stuff, the better.
Well, what do you say to the contractor that's doing their pricing, just kind of pricing it based on what everyone else charges?
Well, I don't ever tell somebody else what to do. I just tell people what worked for me. So if somebody has a way of doing it that they like, who am I to tell them how to run their business? I'm not interested in trying to convince people to do something different. I just explain where we had failures and where we had successes, and I can more or less point to the things we were doing that drove both those outcomes. I can tell you why we had failures, and I can tell you why we had successes. But to answer your question, if your model is you're going to get a sense of what the market is, and you don't want to be the cheapest guy in town, but you don't want to be the most expensive guy, you're just going to kind of shoot for the middle. First of all, I don't know the percentage of business owners who don't know their numbers, their financials. But it's a lot. It's well over 70%. It might be 85%. It's a lot. So if you're taking your pricing and basing off what the guy down the street at John's Excavation is charging, and John doesn't know his numbers, you're putting yourself in tremendous risk by trusting John's judgment, who probably is not looking at his financials to come up with his own pricing, and you're modeling your pricing after that. That's insanity, I would say.
Yeah. What would you say is a good rule of thumb for a gross margin?
If you're below 40%, you're probably in trouble. If you're at 65%, you're probably not paying your employees well enough. But also, when we talk gross margin, it's critical to people understand, like, we got to be talking apples to apples here. So when in my way, again, this is my way. I'm not saying everybody should do it this way, but my way of figuring out what is a direct cost or expenses that should go in cost of goods sold are the things that are only expenses I have if I'm doing a job. So if my company was open for the entire month of November 2024 and I didn't do a single job, I would have some expenses. I would have rent, I would have insurance, I would have, uniform. If I have that, I would have phone bills, I would have software expenses. Those are all overhead expenses. The direct expenses or cost of goods sold are only the costs associated with actually doing the job. So that would be labor, of course, materials, permit, dump fees, those kinds of things. Labor taxes I would include in there. So there's going to be 5 or 6 different expenses that are a cost of goods sold. So we got to make sure. The reason I bring that up is because some companies put their cell phone in direct expenses or cost of goods sold, and that's going to bring down their gross margin. And if you're comparing your financials to a company that does that and you don't, you're not comparing apples to apples. And that's something that I would really encourage them to get an awareness of, is what are actually supposed to be direct expenses and what are not. Because if you're talking to a friend, if you live in North Carolina and you're talking to a friend in Texas who has a similar business, and they tell you our business crushes it when we're at 42% gross margin, but they're including expenses in direct expenses that you're not comparing apples to apples. So that information they're giving you is not helpful. It's actually going to hurt you. And so, but again, if we use the framework of direct expenses or cost of goods sold are only expenses I incur and pay when I actually go do a job, again, rentals, subcontractors, permits, labor, of course, materials, dump fees, that kind of stuff. So again, there's going to be 6 or 7 different things. If you're staying true to having those kinds of expenses in your cost of goods sold, I mean, I wouldn't aim for anything less than like 48%, 45 at the very lowest. But if you're below 40, you're probably in trouble. And again, if you're over 65, you're probably underpaying your employees. Most companies, I would say, are pretty content if they're over 50%. 55%, I think, is a reasonable expectation or goal. Maybe 50% is an expectation, 55% is a goal, somewhere in there. That would be kind of the area I would be saying to folks would be a pretty healthy spot to be.
So level 1, startup, know your numbers, get that P&L looked at, know how to bid your jobs profitably. Pay attention to cash flow, that you're collecting deposits.
Yeah.
They build the business up. Now
there's one other thing I would say in this startup phase, and this is a thing, as you saw the Nowra thing I mentioned, this is the only one of the things we got right in the beginning. And that was, we knew exactly what we were going to build. If you would have taken my partners and I, there's 3 of us, if you would have put us in 3 different rooms and said, draw me an org chart of the company you're going to build, we would have all drawn the same thing. And that was, we didn't know that was a big deal. We had no idea that was actually helping us, but it was massive in how much it helped us, because it made those decision-making points where, do you hire a supervisor? Do you not? Do you promote a guy out of the field and put him in a leadership role or not? All those things are really difficult decisions, because you're giving up revenue, you're giving up cash flow, but you're relinquishing some decision-making ability and some responsibility to lighten your load and things like that. If you don't know what you're building, if you don't know what this company is, quote unquote, supposed to look like in 15 years or 10 years, those decisions become absolutely impossible. You'll lose sleep because you don't know which way to go. Where if you know, I'm going to build a company that has 24 employees, I'm going to have 4 people in the office or 5 people in the office. I'm going to have, 3 supervisors, an ops manager, a sales manager, whatever it is. And you actually draw that out and like, that's what I'm building. All those decisions get immensely easier. Now, I'm not saying that they're easy and you still won't lose sleep at night. I am saying they are much easier if you know exactly what you're trying to build. And one of the things that people can do is and people listening might be going, that sounds fantastic, Brian, but how do I do that? Well, how much money do you want to make in 15 years? Let's say I want to make $500,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I'm going to draw $150,000 salary. That means I need to take out of the business $350,000 post taxes to equal that $500,000. Well, I can do the math and figure out what my tax percentage likely be. Let's say you say it's going to be 35%. Okay. I can do the math and figure out if I need $350,000 after I pay taxes, that means I probably need to generate, again, quick math in my head. I don't know this number off the top of my head, but somewhere around $500,000 in profit of the company. So if I take that money out after I pay taxes, I walk out the door with $350,000. Okay. Well, now I know what the profit of the company needs to be. And then I can look at what is my likely profit, bottom line profit percentage to be. Okay. Let's say it's going to be 10%, just so it's easy math for me. If I need to pull out $500,000 of the company to pay my taxes and walk out the door with $350,000, and I'm going to have a 10% bottom line profit margin, that means I need to have a $5 million company. Okay, well, how many employees in the field do I need to have to generate $500,000? Let's say they're each doing $250,000 a year. Okay, well, that's what, 20 field employees. Okay, now I got my baseline. How many supervisors do I need to run 20 employees? Let's say I need 3. Okay, boom, I got 3. Do I need a manager? Do I need a sales staff? What's my accounting staff going to look like? My dispatch staff, my admin staff? Like, what are the other components, the support staff going to look like to build that kind of company? And boom, you have an org chart with a target that's easily identifiable. I'm building a company with 20 people in the field. I'm going to have 8 support staff. That's what I'm building. A 28-person company is going to generate $5 million a year in revenue and $500,000 in profit. That's exactly what I'm building. So it's not a complicated process, but it does take a little bit. It takes an hour or two. And having that clarity, I'm telling you, it's probably one of the 3 to 5 things that saved us from failure. Is we knew exactly what we were building. When we went that 8 months of not having a single paycheck, but hiring employees, it sucked. Don't get me wrong, but it made sense because we knew we were building a bigger thing. We weren't trying to make every dollar on year 1. We were worried about year 7 and year 8.
Yeah. So, I mean, the person has to have a vivid or create a vivid vision, really, of what they're going to build, what they want the company to look like. They got to be forward thinking.
I just tell you, like,
put in the work to draw
building
that out.
Building a 14-person company and building a 34-person company are very different endeavors. You're going to make different leadership decisions along the way. You're going to make different marketing decisions along the way. You're going to make different vehicle and equipment purchases decisions along the way. All those decisions are dramatically different based on the size of the company you want to build.
Mm-hmm.
And and again, I'm not saying people need to be rigid about this. Like, okay, we say we're going to build my made up 28-person company. Like, we can't deviate from that ever. I'm not saying that. Like, readjust this every 3 years. Fine. Like, or something happens, you change your mind. Fine. But I would just really encourage people to have some idea as detailed as they can of what they want to build, because it makes those painful decision-making situations we're going to go through much easier.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, and that kind of thinking, I mean, whether someone's looking to build a 5 to 10 person company, a 40-person company, I mean, just to create that vivid vision of this is what it's going to look like. You mentioned an org chart, drawing out the org chart. Then you can kind of forecast the expenses and see what it would take to get you there. So let's say,
and the other thing is, like, I did this with one of my clients. He owned a plumbing company, and he gave me some financial benchmarks he wanted to hit and kind of a timeline. And we drew out the org chart, and he needed to build around a 22-person company. And he said, I don't want any part of that. That's too much. I don't want to do that. And it was, how awesome was it for him to learn that early? And so we said, okay. And I said, well, how big of a company do you want to build? He says, I don't really think I want more than 12 guys in the field. Okay, so then we're gonna build a smaller company, and you have to change your timeline or your income expectations. Like, one of these things has to change. Either you build a bigger company or your lower income expectations. That's it, right? But he got real clarity on that. And again, there's no right or wrong answer. We all want different things. But he knew immediately that the thing that he thought he could get this money from a smaller company. We did the math, and it just didn't work. You know, and it was awesome for him to learn that early on.
Yeah. So let's say they do that work and they get out of startup phase, and now they've got some employees.
Yep.
Where do we go from here?
So stage 2 in my framework is all about the customer. Who do we serve? Why would they choose us instead of brand X? There's a couple little financial things we can get into. And at this point, now that I have employees, we're kind of in a firefighter mode. We go to job sites, we get a guy rolling on a job, and then we're going to bounce and go somewhere else, and maybe go to a different job site and check on a different guy there, or we're going to actually go do a job ourselves, or whatever that looks like. But we're now in a situation we have to be in multiple places at once, right? We're delegating tasks, but we're firefighting because we're bouncing around to jobs, and we're trying to manage things remotely and also do things productively ourselves, right? So that's kind of the stage that we're in there. Again, primary areas of focus in stage 2. Again, cash flow. We can't ever forget cash flow is huge in the beginning. It's just as important in stage 2 as in stage 1. But it's really about, who is our customer? What do they want? Why should they buy from us instead of brand X? And when I say these things, here's a critical thing that is important and super difficult. This might be one of the hardest things business owners have to go through, is understanding that this, I'm telling you this from personal experience, because this mistake cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? And that was trying to say the same thing as all of our competitors, just trying to say it more loudly or more passionately or whatever. Like, no, we really do provide excellent quality. We really do stand behind no, those guys are full of crap. We really mean it when we say we have great customers. Like, stop that. Stop that. I'm telling you, that's, if we put ourselves in the role as a consumer, we're going to go to get like the example you heard me talk about now, right? We have a transmission go out on a truck, of which we had many in my company. I don't take my truck to get the transmission fixed at a place I don't think can fix transmissions. That's not how it works. As a consumer, that's obvious. As the seller, though, it's not so obvious. We tend to say, well, yeah, but there's these companies we compete against. Joe's Excavation, those guys cut corners all the time. But the consumer doesn't know that, unless they've been burned by Joe, which is a very small percentage of the interactions we're going to have, is coming in behind somebody who really screwed things up. It happens. Don't get me wrong. But that's a small percentage of the overall experience. And so what the painful lesson we had to learn through hundreds of thousands of dollars of failed marketing attempts was stop talking about what the customer needs, i.e. the service we provide, and talk about how we really mean it. We really do go the extra mile more than those other guys who are saying the same exact words on their website, the same exact words on their radio ads, the quality and the workmanship and warranties and everybody's saying the same thing to the customer. I have all companies who all look exactly the same because they're all saying the same things. They're all saying quality. They're all saying workmanship. They're all saying years of experience. They're all saying whatever legacy there is, third generation or they're all saying these same things. And so therefore none of them are compelling. And so stage 2 is all about identifying who is our customer, what do they want, not just what they need, what do they actually want, and why, what do we provide as far as what they want that is compelling enough that their only choice is us instead of brand X.
Would you say in this stage that like niching down to your core competencies is critical, or would that be more stage 1?
Well, in stage one, you're taking money from whoever has a pulse and a credit card.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So stage two, I think, is where you start getting some refinement. Now, again, I'm not suggesting that people can only do one type of thing, niching down so much that you only do one kind. I'm not suggesting people niche down that far. What I am suggesting is people need to understand their customers and how they make buying decisions and what they want, not just what they need. Right. So for like you heard me give these two examples at the Nowra thing.
Yeah.
And it's funny at a different event for a state chapter, on-site state chapter. I did a class about a year and a half ago, and we had about a 20-minute conversation. And my question was this to the group, and there was about 120 people in the room. And by the way, it was about 70% men, about 30% women. That was the makeup of the group. And my question was, if you're going to a residential homeowner's house, and let's say your client is a 45 to 65-year-old woman, and you have to go in the house, like you have to do something to inside the master bath, or you have to go and locate the septic or like something like that. You have to go in the house. Do you think that 45 to 65-year-old woman is more worried about how well you pump the septic tank or whether or not you're going to go through her underwear drawer? Now, the fascinating thing was, again, 70%-ish men, 30%-ish women in the group. 3/4 of the men said they would care. She cares more about how well they pump the septic tank. 95+% of the women said they care more about, are you going to go through my underwear drawer? These are the kinds of things that we have. And so what resulted was a 20-minute discussion of the women who were the target avatar, by the way, in my scenario, explaining to these guys who are like, no, of course, all she cares about is how well we do the technical work. And they're like, no, you're completely missing it here. You're coming into my private personal space. That is what I care about. That is what I want, is to feel safe and secure in my own home. I expect you're going to pump the septic tank correctly. I don't expect you're a guy who won't go through my underwear drawer. Those are the kinds of things that are critical. So that's a residential version. A commercial version, which is more my expertise, is we're working as a subcontractor for somebody, and they're not going to tell us that their number one concern is something around them looking stupid to their boss, their peers, their customers, things like that, which often comes from poor communication. So if something goes sideways on a job, or they want an update, their boss comes in their office and says, hey, what's going on with this job? And they have to say, I don't know, because we as the provider have not communicated with them. We are jeopardizing their financial future, their stability with the company, the admiration and respect of their peers, and their trust of their boss. We're jeopardizing all that stuff. They're not going to tell us that. So again, in a B2B application, that is way more concerning to people than how well you do the actual work that you're being paid to do. These are the kinds of things that we had to, again, through wasting hundreds of thousands of dollars, trying to just convince people, no, our workmanship really is better. No. We really mean it. We say we stand behind our work. Those guys don't mean it, but we really mean it. Like, these are the things we had to learn about when I say what the customer wants versus what they need. What they need is the service we provide, but the buying decision and what they want are these things that oftentimes have very little to do with what the actual technical work we're doing. So in stage two, we got to start figuring this out. And how broad or how narrow our niche is, I would say people, they're generally on the right track. They'll make modifications along the way. They'll try things that they'll look back 5 years later and go, it wasn't a very good decision. But I don't fault people for that. I do suggest people don't try to be everything to everyone, because that is a recipe for disaster. Now, so what degree they have a very narrow niche and what degree it's a little wider, that's case by case. I couldn't give some kind of broad statement that would help anybody on that.
Mm-hmm. All right. So stage two, know your customer, know who you serve, map out your avatar. Got it. Financials,
Understand,
of course.
Here's the critical question you got to answer. If our company went away, what hole would be left in our geographic area? And if you don't have an answer to that, you're in trouble. So if I say, okay, I own John's Excavation in Corpus Christi, Texas, let's say. If my company went away, the hole that we left in my industry is somebody providing great workmanship and good quality installations or repairs or whatever. That's nonsense. There's plenty of companies who can do that. What hole? What is the thing that we offer that not very many, if any, other competitors offer? What are the things that we offer? And if we don't answer that, we're in trouble. Now we're just in a numbers game with marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to be in. Now, I listen. There's plenty of companies that operate that way, and I'm not criticizing them. Me personally, I want to have a compelling message that nobody else can have. I want to have a compelling reason that actually matters to the customer why they should choose me instead of brand X. That is not saying the same thing as everyone else. So that's the critical question to ask as far as that goes. Other things in stage 2, you got to start putting money away for taxes. Like you cannot treat the money you owe to the government as your money up until April 15th. It's not. That's not how it works. It's not like your Verizon bill where all of a sudden you just have this expense incurred. From the moment you collect the revenue, that's the government's money, and I would silo that money in a separate savings account, kind of like the profit first model. Put it like it's in your savings account, but it's don't commingle it with your money and consider it like your general operating funds to work with, because it's not. Mm-hmm. And this is taxes is a thing where people get in trouble. So that would be something else in stage 2, is at least start setting aside tax money and not commingle that with your personal funds. And I say commingle, that's more of an accounting code or accounting term. I shouldn't use it that way, but don't treat it like it's just in your general checking account. Put that money aside. Put aside your $1,100 a week or $500 a week or $2,000 a week or $4,000 a month or whatever. Put that money aside as you bring it in, so that when the payment comes due every quarter or once a year or once a month, it's just out of sight, out of mind. Okay. And the next thing is, in stage 2, now we have employees. And the biggest risk for small businesses, other than cash flow, I would say, is things relating to employees. In 2019, when I was writing the book, the numbers are probably different now, but in 2019, the statistics were 1 in 8 small businesses were going to be sued every year by an employee. So if you're in business for 8 years, like, do the math, right? Employment law is something that is not to be figured out along the way. Mm-hmm. You gotta, this is where you gotta, you have to have an employee handbook in place, even if you just get a boilerplate template one online or something like that. You got to start getting familiar with how employment law works, because it's not intuitive. It doesn't work how we think it should. The law doesn't care about who's right and wrong. The law cares about following the law. And if we don't know the laws, we're in big trouble here. And one of the things I would do as soon as you hire your first employee, get employment practices insurance. And that's insurance to protect you and to help you if you get in a situation where you get sued by an employee. Many business owners don't even know that's a thing. Any broker you're working with will be able to offer it. It's inexpensive. You get if you get sued and you lose, there's a pool. It's insurance policy, and also they offer HR consulting and help with difficult situations along the way. So stage 2, what's in it for? Who's our customer? What's in it for them to buy from us? Start putting aside money and compartmentalizing money, at least for your personal federal income taxes. Mm-hmm. And then this is also, where we need to start understanding how employment law works and understanding what it's like to deal with employees in a legal sense, not just a management sense.
What about bookkeeping and QuickBooks in this stage?
Well, again, for in stage 1, we need to make sure things are up to date and accurate. That we got to do that right out of the gate, right? But in stage 2, again, just make sure our processes allow things to stay up to date and accurate naturally. We don't have to force it. We don't have to jump in and okay, it's Saturday morning at 10. That means it's time for me to get in and update my QuickBooks, or I got a letter from some 3-letter agency and or some state agency or something like that. Holy crap, I haven't paid attention this while. I better jump in and we don't want those situations. We want to have processes in place where I get a bill from a supplier, it goes into our accounting system, QuickBooks or whatever. I finish a job, I invoice the customer that day, the next day. We want to have processes in place where these things are running smoothly and autonomously. Mm-hmm. You don't want these herky-jerky, I ignore the books for 3 weeks and then boom, I jump in and do a whole bunch of, I do things in a big flurry. We want to start developing processes that run to allow the business to run without me having to interject a bunch of energy in spurts, right?
Okay. All right. So they've managed to do all that. They make it to stage 3. where they're going to start delegating at this point more, right?
Well, you're going to delegate decisions now, not tasks. Stage 2, you're delegating jobs. You're like, hey, you're going to go do this job, and I'm going to go work on a different job, and you're delegating tasks. Stage 3, now you're delegating decision making. Now you're going to have supervisors, you're going to have managers, you're going to have people in key leadership roles that may not be quite as official as having titles, but you're delegating decision making. And by the way, it's my opinion that stage 3 is the most dangerous stage for a business. Most people think it's stage 1, stage 2. And again, there's no shortage of companies. We all know the statistics, how many businesses fail. Cash flow is what puts people out of business in stage 1, stage 2, no question. But stage 3 is the most dangerous because many business owners cannot transition from being a tradesperson, a craftsman, an expert at their trade or craft, and transition and learn new skills to be a business owner. They're not the same skills. They are very different. Now, we have to have that awareness of our industry, of course, but the things that make you a great business owner are not the same things that make you a great plumber or roofer or electrician. They're just not. And so this is where that friction we have of we say we want freedom, but we really want control. This is where that's exposed. And we don't have strategies oftentimes. We don't trust our employees. So we wish they would go do things really well, but then they don't. And so we jump in and like override them or jump in and take control of things. And like they don't ever develop the ability to make decisions. All they can ever really do is tasks that we assign. And so this is where the business owner finds himself working 80 hours a week. They got the same $17,000 in a checking account every month when they start. They're cycling through employees, they're cycling through customers. They're doing a lot of activity, but not making a lot of traction. This is a plateau we will hit if we don't shift gears and start learning the skills that allow us to be a business owner, not a tradesperson.
Well, at this point, at stage 3, are they getting like SOPs in place?
Not yet. Yeah, some for sure. Like there's some things that and just to give you a frame of reference on this, when I was in the steel industry, as I mentioned when we first started, like a whole year of my career, I was in process improvement. I literally wrote procedures for a year. I cited Dr. Deming as being the guy who saved the Japanese auto industry. I'm very much about process improvement. I'm very much about procedures. And I think this is a place where people in service businesses have been given some information I don't think is 100% accurate. In a manufacturing setting where you have a guy running a press of some sort where he's just stamping out 7,000 widgets an hour, like you need to have procedures. You need to have procedures for everything because you don't want the employee making spontaneous decisions. That's the whole point of a process and procedure, is to not allow the employee to make spontaneous decisions. Here's how we do the thing every single time. Okay, that works fantastic in a manufacturing setting. It does not work fantastic when you're installing a water heater when there's 63 variables on every single install. So there are some things we need to have process and procedures for early on. Of course, things around safety, shoring, risk mitigation, credit card protection, like things around risk. Yes, early on, we want to start establishing some procedures and things like billing. Of course, you want, things that they work the same way every time. Yeah, there's going to be some of those. I think that people have been, anyone who's read a business book since 1992 has been told procedures. And again, I'm a firm believer in them. They have their place. But this idea that you're going to write 100 procedures that's going to be warehoused in a 3-ring binder you're going to give everyone, or some online shared drive or something like that, and people are actually in the real world going to stop before they install that water heater and pull up the procedure, it's ludicrous. That's not how it's going to work, right? So there are some procedures we need to get early on around risk and cash flow and like generally how we do estimates and our timeline for completion on things that involve money and estimates and things. Yes, of course. But this is not the place to go like deep dive into estimates. For me, that's much more of a stage 4 thing. Right?
In stage 3, is the owner still out in the field doing the work, or have they gotten past that part and now they are delegating?
They're kind of tweeners, I would say. Okay. So the beginning of stage 3, yes. At the end of stage 3, no. That's the best way I could answer that question.
Okay. For excavation and septic, I would say this is like the 500,000 to million mark.
Yeah, it could even be a little bigger.
A little more, maybe.
You could have companies that are 2 or 3 or even 4 million that are in this area.
Yeah. Okay, so they're developing a leadership team, but by this point, there's not clearly defined SOPs, but people know their role. They know how to do the thing.
Yeah, I would say that's a good way of saying it. And again, there are clearly defined SOPs for critical things. I'm not saying don't ever do an SOP. Of course, I'm not saying that. What I am saying is this is not the point to park everything and just start, furiously writing and come out with 142 SOPs you expect people to follow diligently every single time. I've not seen that work successfully in a service business like excavation or plumbing or HVAC. Because even if you get the procedures, like think about this. Is it harder or easier to install a water heater, for example, or drive a car 1 mile down the road? Okay, well, it depends on the water heater, depends on the road. But just like you're middle of the road, I would say it's probably easier to drive a car a mile down a 35-mile-an-hour road than it is to install a water heater. How many pages would it be to write a procedure to drive a car 1 mile down a 35-mile-an-hour road? You had to account for like what happens if a kid kicks a ball in the street. What happens if there's a yellow light versus a red light versus a green light that's been green for a while? It'd be 700 pages. It's insane, right?
Well, maybe a better question is by this phase, stage 3, they're delegating. They have leaders. Is there a checklist? Maybe not procedures, but a checklist to make sure you did the thing right.
Yeah. So checklists are fantastic. Processes are fantastic. So real quick, let's just cover real quick the difference between a process, procedure, and checklist. Did you ever see the movie Sully, the one about Sully where he landed the plane in the Hudson River when they hit I don't know, like 10 years ago that came out?
I did see that.
Did you ever see it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Great example of the difference between a checklist, a process, and procedure. In the movie, they're flying out of JFK Airport in New York City. And before the pilots take off the plane, they go through a checklist. Like, do you have fuel? Is the route mapped? Is the backup route mapped? Do we have an idea of what the weather's going to be like? They have this checklist. Are the passengers on the plane? Right? There's a checklist. It doesn't necessarily matter the order these things are addressed. It just matters that we don't forget them. That is a great example of a checklist. Has fantastic applications in the service industry, in any service industry for sure. Just don't forget these things. We don't care what order they're done in, but just don't forget them. Right? Then fast forward in the movie 4 minutes, and Sully, who's been a pilot for 40 years, is taking off the airplane. Now, I promise you, somewhere there's a procedure written for that, for taking off an airplane. But Sully didn't look at the procedure. He's done it 10,000 times. He knows how to do it. He took off the airplane. That's a process. He went through the process of taking off the airplane, but he wasn't studying a procedure as he did it, right? Falling downstairs is a process. Riding a bicycle is a process. Driving a car is a process. We do lots of things that are processes, but we don't read a procedure to do them. Processes make sense. They can be verbal. They can be loosely defined in a written form, but they're different than a checklist. Fast forward in the movie again, another 5 minutes. They take off at 2,500 feet. They hit a flock of birds. Both engines burn out. This is not something they've done 10,000 times. So what happens in the movie? The co-pilot literally reaches above him, pulls out a 3-ring binder, thumbs to the page that says, what do you do when both engines burn out? And they follow a step-by-step procedure. The co-pilot says, do this. Pilot says, I did it. Check. Now do this. Did it. Check. Now do this. Did it. Check. That's a procedure. Procedures in the service world are generally not helpful because there's so many variables. A process, a known process, whether it's documented and like it's just in loose form or even verbal is okay in some cases. So I would focus more on processes and not get to procedures yet. We will get to procedures, but checklists are probably more helpful here. Processes are probably more helpful here than procedures would be. Okay. But stage 3 is really about the business owner giving up control. That's really the crux of what stage 3 is about. To get that freedom, you have to give up control. To give up control, you have to trust people to make good decisions while you're not there. To have people who can make good decisions while you're not there, you have to have educated people who understand things like, what are we trying to build? What's special about us? Why do our customers like us? What's the customer journey we're taking them on? from the moment they pick up that phone call, not knowing who we are, we're some unknown contractor. What are the things they're really worried about? They have all the baggage of all the contractors who've let them down in the past. They don't know how awesome we are. They don't know how special we are. They don't know how nice we are. They know none of that stuff. Where are they starting that journey? And where do we want them to be after we finish a job or in a commercial setting, like after we've been working with them for 6 months? They need to understand stuff like that to make really good decisions, right? They need to understand what our employees like and not like about this job. There's things that suck about every job. And if we discount those things, it's going to be hard to retain and hire people. We also have to understand, like, what are the things that we have to get right no matter what? You know, you heard me talk about in an hour thing. Like we developed this thing called primary functions. These are the 3 things that no matter what, we can't get wrong. We got to get the plumbing right. Obviously, you can't be a plumbing contractor and not do that well, but that's not it. Accident prevention, arguably the most important thing we do every day. Arguably the most important thing any plumber does driving a company vehicle is not wrecking that vehicle every day. And I guarantee you, if I called 10,000 plumbers who drive company vehicles every day and said, what's the most important thing you do? If I out of 10,000, like 3 would say accident prevention, and only like if they're the owner's kid. Employees don't know this stuff, right? And the third thing for us was communication, because again, we were more B2B. Our clients were other businesses generally. Communication, arguably the most important thing we did. If we didn't have that, we didn't have a competitive advantage anymore. If without good communication, which is what our entire brand was built on in a commercial application, if we didn't have that, we're just another contractor. So the 3 most important things were plumbing, accident prevention, and communication. If our employees don't understand that, especially if our leadership team doesn't understand that, I can't trust them to make any decisions. So we start with high level things like that and work down into more detailed things. Again, the checklist you're talking about, processes and stuff like that. How do you handle customer complaints? Like what threshold do you trust their decision? Like, is it up to $2,500? Or in this scenario, I want you to handle it. In a different scenario, I want you to kind of get a plan, run it by me before you act. Or in this other scenario, you just gather the information, bring it to me, I'll make a decision, and then you'll carry it out. Clarity on things like that in developing a leadership team are absolutely critical. And again, we have to do this because we have to invest the time to train people to make good decisions so I get more time later on. You know, when I sold my company, I was working 3 days a week. I worked around 20 hours a week. I didn't get there by not teaching people stuff. The only way I got there was investing the time to teach our employees and to teach our leadership team, here's how we do things, here's what we're trying to accomplish, here's the values and priorities and criteria we use to make decisions. Here's the most important things we do. Here's where our customers really care about, things like that. You can't have people who make good decisions without them having that knowledge, which requires time to teach them.
Before we get into step 4 or stage 4, freedom for business owner, because we were on 3, right? We're going to be moving on to 4.
We're still on 3. Yep.
What do you look for in leadership qualities for team members?
You know, I only have 2 criteria for any employee. Doesn't really matter their role. The first one is, do they care? Do they want to do a good job? If they don't have that, I really am not interested. They need to be somebody else's problem. The second criteria I have is, can I make them better? And that may mean direct involvement for me, like teaching, like in a leadership capacity, like teaching them actual leadership strategies. Like, when this happens, here's a strategy with a beginning, middle, and end, like a process. Can I teach them those things? And can they learn those things? Are they willing and able to learn? But, you know, for me, interest and desire to do a good job is like, that's the thing, right? If they're doing this because they have to, that's a different level of performance I'm likely to get than doing this because they want to. I want people who want this. I want people who are driven and want to do a good job. If I don't have that, I don't care about anything else. If I do have that, the next question I ask myself is, can I make them better? And you know, for me, like I don't have it. There's more books written on leadership than anything in the world except for religion and sales, probably. I don't have any corner angle that's unique about leadership. We all know the same stuff. You need people with integrity. You need people who are honest. You need people who can, you know, problem solve. All those things are true. I would say the thing that I would look at that is probably not talked about a whole lot is, are they willing to sacrifice their own personal drivers and needs for the good of the team? So, for example, what I mean is, many people, especially in the trades and service industries, blue collar service industries, you're rewarded by being right. Like you hire as an apprentice and you learn, and as you gain skills, you become the journeyman, and as you gain skills, you become the superintendent or what project manager, and you ascend. And we really pride ourselves on this knowledge we have, and like, I get to be the guy who gets all the recognition for having all this knowledge, or I get to be the guy who gets to be right all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine, but sometimes that's the exact price you have to pay to develop a team who can function really well. And if they're not able to sacrifice that thing that they really, really want, like, I really like being right, but if I was not willing to sacrifice that for the good of the team, we would have never been able to grow, because my needs would have come paramount over the team's at all time. So one of the things I look for is, can the leader know when it's appropriate to lean into their desires and strengths, and know when it's appropriate that leaning in too hard is going to be actually detrimental.
Yeah. Did you ever experiment or maybe use like personality tests or anything to help gauge for leadership or other positions in your?
Yeah, we did some of that, especially for hiring our guys in the field. Again, we were, for us, that we weren't hiring journeyman plumbers because there was none to be had. We just didn't. There was not enough in the market to do that. So we hired people who were green, and we had to train them from the ground up. And so we were, that's a $150,000 investment in a person. Mm-hmm. And so we did do some of that stuff, but I simplified a little bit more. I generally think there's a DISC assessment, and I did one called BEST back in the late 90s. There's a ton of these things, but generally I think people fall into kind of 4 categories. They want to be right. These are your task-oriented introverts. They want to win. These are your task-oriented extroverts. They want to be recognized. These are your relationship-oriented extroverts. These are like your outside salespeople who are the life of the party and things like that. And then people who want to be liked, who are your relationship-oriented introverts. Those have worked well for me, just like identifying this person wants recognition, this person wants to be right, this person wants to be liked, this person wants to win. And getting them to understand where they kind of live in there. And again, nothing is like, these aren't rigid things. Many of us bleed over from one to another. I get all that. But them having recognition that that's their natural driver, and that is the exact cost that they will have to pay to ascend in leadership, is that thing that they want the most. If you're a person who wants to be liked, if you prioritize being liked over the needs of the team, you'll end up with situations where some employees get away with things that others don't because you don't like the confrontation, or you don't want to deal with a nasty situation. So you just want the employees to kind of figure out themselves. Well, you're putting your needs above the team, and the team can't grow beyond that, right? If you have to be the person who gets all the recognition, one of the worst guys I ever worked for. He had to be the guy who got all the recognition. When the boss came, this was for a company that was a nationwide company I worked for. When his boss would come in, the vice president would come in. All the wins that we had, he took credit for all of those things. Well, guess what? People stopped trying to win because he was going to get all the credit. So these are the kinds of things I look for in leadership. Of course, you got to have honesty, integrity, do the right thing. Like all those things are important. But this is something that I look at for. I think maybe more than most folks is, are they willing to pay the price of the thing that they want the most for the good of the organization, for the good of their subordinate employees, for the good of the customer? And if they're not, they're going to make very selfish decisions in the long run that are not going to help us grow.
Got it. Okay. So we've made it to phase 4, freedom for the business owner.
Yeah.
It's been a long, wild ride. Let's talk about it.
This is so I mentioned stage 3 being the most dangerous. Stage 4, I think, is the second most dangerous. And here's why. You go from working 60, 50, 60, 70, 80 hours a week where like the business owns you. You're just a glorified babysitter. You can't get away. Like, you're needed for everything. And then it seems like overnight, in a very short period of time, sometimes a few months, sometimes maybe a year, all of a sudden If you don't come in on Tuesday, nobody cares. Nobody even knows sometimes. There's nothing you're working on now in stage 4 that is urgent because there's no immediate consequences. Things you're working on are things like process and procedures, developing your leadership team, looking at forward, like what a succession plan might look like. You're looking at very long-term things here. Nothing has there's no immediate needs. So if you just kind of mail it in for a few weeks, your employees don't care. Sometimes they're thankful because you're out of their hair.
Mm-hmm.
And we go from my business owns me and that frustration to, what do you mean you need me? Now we're annoyed that the business needs us, right? And that freedom is like heroin. It all of a sudden we just disengage too soon, right? And we don't. So staying engaged in stage 4 is probably the hardest thing because you don't have to. The business over the long term needs you to, but if you don't do it today, there's no consequence tomorrow. And this is where business owners step away. Like their business is 90% ready to be this autonomous money printing machine that can run without them. It's 90% of the way there. And they check out before they get to 100%, and it all comes tumbling down because they disengage too fast.
And then what happens? Like they disengage and just the team collapses. And
They don't have the process and procedures in place. They don't have the leadership team who can make good decisions. This is where people start talking about flipping houses, or I'm going to start a second business. And again, their business is like 90% of the way there. But when they step away, that 10% that they still do that holds it all together is not there anymore. And the people just can't do it without them.
They lose focus, in other words.
Oh yeah. They lose interest, honestly, in many cases. Because if I can go, take a week off and nobody really cares, and in some cases might even know, like, why wouldn't I just do that more often? And we do. And I'm not, like, by the way, I'm not opposed to that. We build a company to give us that freedom, but we still have to be engaged to the degree the business needs us. We still have to help keep developing our leaders to have an ever increasing role and ability to own the responsibility we're giving them. If you take an operations manager and you bail for a couple weeks, or you're just gone 1 week a month, and that operations manager is not able to do the role of a general manager, and you're not there to do it, those things aren't getting done, and the business will suffer.
So at this phase, are they in position if they wanted to sell the business or not quite? It's not as quite dialed in at this point.
Well, I mean, the answer is on that kind of there's lots of variables. I couldn't give a blanket answer. Again, they're really close. They're certainly close. And I would say that you can sell any business. It's just a matter of how much you want to sell it for, right? But a business that is at the beginning of stage 4 that doesn't have that detailed sophistication, you don't have actual procedure. Now, this is where we actually get into procedures. Now we have all the big picture context where the procedures fit within and it all makes sense, right? A business that's not an autonomous money printing machine that requires the business owner to have a job is worth less than a business that can run 100% without the business owner. And this is where we shore that up, right? So you got to take your people in leadership roles and teach them how to do the next level leadership role, right? You got to take your ops manager and make them a general manager. You got to take your sales lead and make them a sales manager. You got, this is where you have to increase their skills or hire people who can do those roles. So then you don't have to. But somebody's got to be doing the long-term planning. Somebody's got to be doing the things necessary to make this business more valuable. And that's where now we have the time, but we don't have the urgency to drive us to do things today. And that's why we check out.
Okay. So that's 4. And then there's a stage 5, which is passing that point and becoming a mentor. So what does that look like?
Stage 5 is essentially just teaching all the people you have, all the things you learn in stages 1 through 4. Now I'm teaching my managers how to develop managers. Now I'm teaching, leads how to become managers. Now I'm teaching leads how to better run their teams. All these leadership strategies I've learned, I'm teaching to people at lower levels. So the company again, my goal is to have decisions made at the lowest possible level, not the highest. So we're taking those decisions, and like the things a manager does now, okay, let's get those down to where a lead can do those things. Right. But it's basically teaching the people the things I didn't know in stage 1 and stage 2. I need my people to have a better understanding now than I had when I first started.
Okay. So this would be like mastery.
Mentor, yeah, I call it mentorship. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is just I'm focused on the vision, stability, again, still cash flow, of course. But do my managers can they develop a 5-year plan? Are they fluent in financials? Can they adopt to significant business changes? Can the business run when they're not there? Like now, all these things just go down a level, right? So now I'm mentoring the people that to do the things well that I struggled with early on relative to where they are in the org chart.
Who has been or what has been one of your biggest influences in your career?
I was super blessed. In the steel industry, I had a couple of mentors. One, a guy named Mike, he really took me under his wing and loved me at times that he shouldn't have, was patient with me more than he should have been, and actually taught me strategies. Didn't just tell me to go like figure it out, but actually taught me step-by-step strategies on things like leadership, dealing with employee situations that are not fun. And he was an absolute master at these things. All these things I'm talking about, all the things I help people with, I sucked at every one of these things in the beginning. I was the worst when I first got into a management role. I was the worst supervisor ever. I got my team hated my guts. I was horrible. He helped me learn actual strategies to become good. So I was blessed to have some, and there was a guy named Dave and a guy named Bill in that industry that really, again, they all taught me different components, but they were just fantastic mentors. And then when I moved into the plumbing business, I learned from people who were absolutely horrific bosses, and I learned what not to do. And I saw the fallout from really horrible things that they were doing that they thought was the right thing, but I saw the consequences in the team and in the company and with the customers that they couldn't see because people didn't want to tell them. And so I had kind of both. I had a solid group of men who taught me how to be a good leader in my early 20s. And then I had a different group of people later on who showed me what not to do. And I don't know which is more valuable.
What advice would you give to entrepreneurs starting out in the service industry?
Well, the biggest thing I would say, like in our company, I mentioned when I sold, we were like 95% commercial. The only residential work we did was referrals from our commercial customers, right? Mm-hmm. When we started, we didn't want to do commercial at all. All we wanted to do was retail. All we wanted to do was B2C, deal with homeowners and consumers. We did not want to do commercial work. But we ended up doing what we were really good at. My background was in commercial. And we struggled with the marketing stuff. We were competing against really powerhouse companies. And so we gravitated towards what our strengths were. And we built a company that the size of the company is exactly what we mapped out. You know, we would have pegged it at around 60 employees. When I sold, we had 54, and that company has over 60 employees now for sure. But we weren't serving the clients we thought we would. So my point with that is it's not going to look exactly how you think it's going to look when you start. And that's okay. Just don't quit. Like you're going to learn this stuff along the way, and you're going to hit tremendous roadblocks. And you just be like, this sucks and this isn't working. And how I thought this is going to go isn't working. And it's okay for it to be different than what you thought. Like, again, our example is we were only going to be residential. We ended up being all commercial. That's just part of the process, is like learning where we fit in, learning our niche, learning who we serve well, who likes working with us, who do we like working with. Those are things we're going to learn along the way. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, just some of these things, just don't overcomplicate them. There's only two ways to learn: mistakes or mentorship. You either learn by banging your head against the wall until you figure out a way around it, or you ask somebody for help. That's it. There's no third option. We tend to overcomplicate things that seem really big, but they're not. And we tend to diminish things that are a bigger thing than we think they are. For example, going back to your leadership thing, holding myself to the standard, holding my employees to a standard of outcomes. For example, like, I don't care what you meant to do. What I care is you flooded the job site. That's the thing I care about. But holding myself to the standard of what my intent was, like, okay, I screwed this up, but I meant well. Those are the kind of things we tend to diminish that have massive consequences. And things that seem like these big daunting issues, oftentimes we overcomplicate them. And so, again, just ask for help. You are surrounded by people who are willing to give you advice. Now, I'm not saying to ask your Aunt Sally, who's never owned a business. I'm not saying to ask her. I don't care what her opinion is on what how I should plan for my tax payments and things like that. But develop a network of people who can help you with stuff. Like, if you're in North Carolina, find a friend in Denver who can help you. That's not a competitor, who's going to be honest with you. People are willing to tell you what you need to hear. Your employees will tell you why they don't like their job if you just ask them. Your customers will tell you what they don't like if you just ask them. Like, people will give you the answers, and that's the only way to learn other than just trial and error. So either we learn through mistakes or we learn through mentorship. That's it.
What's one piece of advice you wish someone gave you at the beginning of your journey?
Oh, man. The biggest mistake we made was in marketing, and we trusted people. I guess it would be this. We didn't have the ability to make good decisions because we didn't know the criteria by which to judge the success of marketing campaigns. So all we were left with was the confidence and enthusiasm and the industry jargon that was being thrown at us. And we went from we went from provider to provider to provider, not ever really learning the criteria, what would tell us this thing was working or not working. And that cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars. Understanding, knowing what the criteria is to determine, is this thing successful or not successful? I think that's something that I wish I would have learned earlier. Again, there's a million things. We screwed up all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Again, every one of these things I'm talking about, I sucked at 30 years ago. Every one of them. Like, so these aren't things that I woke up, when I was 14 and knew. These are things I learned either by doing it the hard way and failing until I figured it out, or by asking somebody for help or somebody mentoring me. But that is one of the things I would say, like, if I'm going to make a decision, I want to be certain upfront. I know the criteria to tell me if after I make the decision, am I on the right track or wrong track?
Awesome. So you are involved in coaching, right?
Yes.
And you have this book, which I highly recommend people pick up, Service Industry Success by Brian Harding. How can you help business owners to run more profitable, effective businesses and so on?
Well, I do a weekly podcast. They're 15, 20-minute episodes, talking about all the things we just talked about: people problems, process problems, profitability problems. I cover in that podcast everything from, how to determine how much profit to take out of the company and put into your personal checking account, to, like, right now I'm doing a 5-part series on developing up and coming leaders. It's also called Service Industry Success. It's anywhere you find podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere you find a podcast, it's out there. If you like video, it's on YouTube, it's on Rumble, it's easy to find. There's that. I have other resources. If people are having a hard time hiring, they can go to freehiringwebinar.com. I did a webinar a couple years ago that's been really helpful for people finding people where it's not so easy to find people. So if you're getting a bunch of applicants and you have a hard time sorting through them, it's not for that. We've been trying to hire this position for X amount of time. We haven't got any traction. It's to help with that kind of situation. I do group coaching. I don't love the word coaching, but there's not a better one. So I do some group stuff. I do one-on-one stuff, of course. I do fractional COO stuff. I'm easy to get a hold of. I'm easy to find on Facebook. My email address is brian@successful-concepts.com. But you can check me out on Facebook. Again, I'm easy to find. If people are interested in, like, learning more, just reach out. I'm not a high pressure sales guy. I did very well when I sold my company. I could sell everything I have and move to Arkansas, never have to work again. I enjoy doing this. It pisses me off still that people are out there selling themselves as business coaches, having never owned a business. There's a lot of that out there, and it really irritates me. So I'm not a high pressure sales guy. I enjoy doing what I'm doing for the right people. But yeah, there's some free resources, and again, I do group stuff and one-on-one stuff at all kinds of different levels of involvement.
Awesome. Well, Brian, this was a fantastic podcast. You provided a wealth of value. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course, glad to help.
I love how you broke things down, into the different phases and kind of made it clear, because I know our listeners can then kind of gauge to see what phase are they in, and, got some good advice, hopefully, of next steps.
Yeah, one of my clients one time told me, Brian, your superpower is taking really complex problems and breaking them down into actionable step-by-step solutions. And again, all just from reps. I had people who were willing to teach me, and I had the courage to try things, and it's just through reps. So again, thanks for having me on. If you ever want to do this again, let me know. I'll be happy to come back on with you. And people have any questions, they can certainly reach out however they want.
Yep. Awesome. Thanks. So Brian Harding, book, don't forget to get it. Service Industry Success. And the website is what again? Also
Service Industry Success for that also. And the podcast is also called Service Industry Success. So the podcast looks exactly like the logo for the podcast looks exactly like the front cover of that book.
Awesome. Very cool. All right. Well, to everyone, happy Thanksgiving. And
happy Thanksgiving.
We'll see you next time. With that, I guess we'll bring the podcast to a close. All righty. Thank you so much, Brian.
Hey there, excavation pros. If you enjoyed today's podcast, make sure to like and subscribe to our podcast and channel. Leave us your feedback and let us know how we did. And hey, if you're interested in taking your excavation or septic business to the next level online, make sure you visit excavationmarketingpros.com today and take advantage of our free resources and mastermind group for excavation and septic industry professionals.